Good morning. This is Eileen Doherty, and I'm the director of the Colorado Gerontological Society. And I would like to welcome you this morning to our program on aging in the know. And our topic this morning is helping older adults leave their home again. One of the things that most of us have been confronted with in the past year is the inability of people to really be free and to feel like they could go out into the community. So one of the things that we would like to invite you to do is go ahead and put your name and email in the chat so that people can copy it and network with you after the session if they would like. We will make copies of the slides available after the session later today. And if you have any questions during the chat, there will be, you can put them in the chat, or there will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end as well. So what we'd like to cover today a little bit is helping older adults to be able to leave their home again. I'm going to talk a little bit about norms. I'm going to talk about staying home and being distant. Talk a little bit about identity crisis and something now that I have called the vaccine normal, because many of you may be aware that we keep talking about going back to normal, but the pre-pandemic normal will look very different than the post-pandemic normal. And right now it's my contention that we're in the vaccine normal. Also talk a little bit about the ongoing fears and problems associated with people entering back into the community. So what we see here is basically that people are interested in getting together with their grandkids. They're interested in getting together socially to be able to go out and be able to do things. And although we yearn for those things at this stage of the game, we also know that there are some issues associated with being able to do that and do that well. So that brings us basically to this morning's conversation, which is, what are norms? Norms are basically expected behaviors of conduct. They define what is good. They tell us what is right and what's important. The norms are basically things that everybody follows because they are rules of the road. That's what we do. We don't go out and stand in the middle of the street and scream blue bloody murder. We do things like help our neighbor, open the doors for people who are frail. All of those things are expected behaviors. We also have some formal rules, and those are very established. You can't go out and murder your mother. You can't drive down the street on the wrong way. You can't go to school without your vaccines. You can't go into a nursing home without your flu vaccine. Those are very written, they're very established. And I should say you can't go into a nursing home. You can go in, but under certain conditions. They're usually written down, and we all know what they are. In the past year, we've had a number of written rules relative to the pandemic, and the biggest one has been stay home, stay home, stay home, especially for older adults. And then we have something which we call the informal norms, and these are our interactions with people. It's how we behave in public. It's the fact that we don't go around walking without any clothes on. We don't usually wear our pajamas to the grocery store. These are behaviors that are basically dictated without written rules. If you violate them, there's usually no penalty associated with it. However, people frown upon it, and it's not something that they would normally condone, if you will. So the norm today has been basically before a month or so ago is that we were communicating with people through glass windows. We were trying to touch them with a piece of plexiglass. We were doing drive-bys for people in nursing homes. We were bringing food to people rather than sitting down and having lunch with them. Other things that we were doing is that we were sitting around a lot with masks on. In this particular situation, maybe this was a family that was all living in one household, or maybe they were not, but they're sitting there with computers, they have iPads, they're all masked up. The other group on the side is making I love you with fingers, doing a Zoom call or something of that type. This has become our norm, if you will. Other norms that we are starting to work on is we no longer shake hands with people. Some people do elbow bumps. We saw that a lot, especially in the press conferences that Governor Polis did over the years. We saw a lot of people getting masks, basically just, reaffirming, if you will, what these norms are. Another norm we had was we looked at very different ways to do acts of kindness. So we would hand somebody a rose or something through the door or through the window. We would send them flowers or we would send them chocolates. On the right-hand side, we see a family trying to engage with someone and having the dog involved in that particular interaction. Another interaction is that we cheered people on from a distance. We stood outside their rooms, we stood outside their houses. We basically were very careful, if you will, about how we interacted with people. And this is another viewpoint where instead of giving people a hug and a kiss as we left their presence, we would share a glass of wine with them for social interaction, or we would wave goodbye. So, and then the last one that we have at this point is social distancing. And there we also see people sitting on a porch. Clearly, they are familiar with each other, but practicing physical distancing. And lastly, here we have then the couple that is trying to interact both on the phone as well as their computer. So these are just a few of the ways that our norms have changed in the last year. So our pandemic norm really is one of isolation. It's been one of quarantine. Many of us have found ourselves in quarantine for 14 days. We have definitely isolated from people that we didn't know, both physically in terms of being isolated because we had been exposed to COVID-19, or we isolated simply because we needed to stay home to protect ourselves. We have all pretty much adapted to wearing masks and being physically distant. This has caused a lot of problems we have been able to figure out in our office for people, especially with hearing impairments and vision impairments, where people depend on such things as lip reading to be able to interact. Our pandemic norm has also, as I said a few minutes ago, required many of us to stay home. In our home, we have not entertained for more than a year. Our last entertainment was March the 17th of 2020. We did one last entertainment on St. Patrick's Day prior to everybody going into quarantine. We wanted to do something for St. Patrick's Day this year, but chose not to in the interest of caution. We also have limited very much in-person contact with family and friends, and we have limited much of our travel, both domestically as foreign. We've also limited a lot of travel within the city or within the state. So again, staying home is the norm. We also have avoided large crowds. We have avoided getting together with strangers. In our office, that has meant that we have done few, if any, we've done no out of the office contacts. We've done no educational programs. We have done no large events. All of that has been done on Zoom, and we've had some relatively large events. So what are we moving toward then in terms of that vaccinated norm? We're basically moving toward, once you get the vaccine, you will be able to leave more freely with masks, but you will still want to physically distance. You will also want to limit contact with people that you know. You probably do not want to engage with a large group of people yet at this point in time, and those crowds should be small. So you don't want to be giving a large Memorial Day party maybe. We'll see what happens by Memorial Day, but it's perfectly fine to get together with small groups. They are allowing domestic and foreign travel at this point in time, but they're also under the vaccinated norm wanting you to distance yourself from large groups and crowds. So as we transition now to the vaccinated norm, what's going to happen? So part of what we have had to do in this new world, if you will, is that we have very much had to embrace change. Many companies have adapted to virtual or technology-based service delivery. So we are seeing that with museums offering programs. We see that with huge efforts on the part of television, such as public broadcasting. We are seeing churches doing remote work. Everybody has pretty much gone to remote virtual types of technology. And you have either had to find ways to embrace that, to accept it, or you have not been able to participate in those kinds of events. The other thing I think which has been an unintended consequence is for the last number of years, we in aging have always heard that older adults are very behind in terms of use of technology. The last statistic that I saw, which was probably 3 or 4 months ago now, has indicated that at least 72% of people 65 and over are now either using a tablet or similar device, a computer, or a smartphone. So one of the things that has happened is that we have been pushed, if you will, into the pandemic norm to embrace technology. We not only have had to get it, we've had to learn how to use it and adapt it. Part of the other thing, though, that has happened is that we have also had to learn how to be more secure in the cyber world. Many of you may have already been a victim of the Department of Labor unemployment fraud claims. That has happened to some of my family members, and we have had numerous calls here at the office of people who are not even in the workforce or who are being identified as an employer for needing to verify employment. So cybersecurity is one of the things that we've also had to learn and be much more conscious about it. We haven't been given a lot of choice because many of us have also been forced to do shopping online. So we put our credit card in, oftentimes without much thought, and that subjects us to additional vulnerabilities, if you will. Similarly, when you put your information on a credit card, say in, or you are shopping online, you are ordering holiday gifts, birthday gifts, or whatever online, you are also now being subjected to a lot less privacy because the the artificial intelligence, as well as the data mining of the agencies that you are doing business with, now know even more about who you are, about what your buying habits are. And some of them are so programmed that if you look at something on a shopping list, they may actually start to pick that item up prior to your making a final purchase, just because of the human behavior and the propensity to move in those directions. Many of us have had to upgrade both our technology as well as find new workspaces. And there's still a lot that is in the manual world, but we're getting closer and closer to having to improve all of our work from a technological perspective. So the strategy, basically, if you are faced with this, as most of us are, is that we really have to drive our talents and expertise so that we can align with this new world. The pandemic has made us feel very much out of control. In the long-term care situation, most residents have been traumatized, and this is true trauma in the sense that we are going to find ourselves needing very much to provide mental health supports, as well as other supports for people who probably are going to experience flashbacks. They may experience post-traumatic stress syndrome. They may continue for many days and weeks and months to come in various kinds of clinical depressions. The other thing that has happened, not only in long-term care, but very overtly in long-term care, but as well in the community, is that there has been a lack of inability to grieve for loss. Most of us have known many people who have died who are around us. Some of that has been specifically associated with COVID-19. I, for example, lost 12 family and friends last year alone. And one of the things I did is I looked in my hometown newspaper from early November until the end of January, and there were 272 deaths that were reported in the local newspaper in a small town in western Kansas. It covered the greater area, but still is a lot of death. Most people were not able to go to funerals, were not able to say goodbye. And so doing all of that grief and loss work is also something that we are going to have to be aware of and work on as we go into the post-pandemic norms. The other thing that many people have experienced is loneliness and isolation. And I have some additional statistics in a couple of future slides that really talk about that. People also, especially in the community, have felt that they have lost their independence and freedom, that they have not been able to really communicate with the public, that they have been dependent, that they now do not necessarily like being able to depend on other people. They would prefer to go to the grocery store and pick out their broccoli or whatever else it is they're looking to purchase, rather than to have the shoppers at the grocery stores bring to them whatever it is that they have available. In terms of loneliness, many of us have been forced to reach out in very different ways. We have also had to depend on family through phone calls or other types of community-based programs in various kinds of senior living facilities. Staff have been required to meet some of those needs for loneliness and isolation. The other thing that has happened is that we have needed to look at what are our favorite activities, and we've tried to recreate these new normals. So some of that, again, is doing church online, different kinds of programming, different kinds of podcasts, just a whole variety of things. Many people have engaged in regular phone calls, in regular gaming nights, all of this being done from the privacy of your own home with other individuals in the privacy of their home. Other people have found different and new ways to reach out to family and friends. People have sent memoirs. They have sent mementos, games for people to do, coloring books, video chats, cards, all kinds of things that people have really engaged in. Some people have successfully used Alexa by purchasing one of those devices so that they could help older adults who are technologically challenged to play music, to make phone calls, whatever. Some people have figured out how to volunteer remotely from home. So those are some of the norms that we have adopted, if you will, as part of the pandemic. The other thing that has been compromised in all of this is our identity. And what is identity? Well, identity is basically, who are we? It's how do we define ourselves? Are we old? Are we young? Are we male? Are we female? What do we like to do? What's our socioeconomic status? Who do we interact with? And part of what has happened during the pandemic is that identity that we have used for months and years for most of us to define who we are has actually been interrupted, because we no longer can necessarily see people and how they interact with us. We don't see their facial expressions. We don't see whether they smile, especially on things like a phone call. And that often results then in anxiety. We also see a lot of identity conflict, because part of what happens is that our self-image as part of this is threatened. Our routines are upset. Some of us have even seen our income affected as we do all of these various things from an in-home perspective or from a secluded, less interactive perspective. It really challenges who we are and where we're going. So another thing that happens is as we look at how do we deal with this identity crisis, we are given an opportunity to again make lemonade out of lemons. So one of the things that you can do as you are emerging into this vaccine norm is really take stock or inventory about who you are. Reflect on what things are making you happy, what things are causing you to be uncomfortable. How do you get through those kinds of things? It gives us an opportunity to review not only our expectations of ourselves, but also our other expectations that others have of us. And we might look at this pandemic norm as a mistaken identity. But again, if we look at what do we want to be in our vaccine norm or in our post-pandemic norm, then this gives us an opportunity to really look at who do we want to be. So one of the suggestions is that we make a list of what brings us joy and meaning. How do we find purpose? And in some people, the new purpose or the new interactions that we have created bring us significant joy and opportunity. So this gives us a way to reevaluate our priorities, to look at our values, to say what really motivates us and how do we want to move forward. Gives us an opportunity to create a new you, mostly because everybody has had to change and we need to change with them. As we go through this change process, if you will, in terms of dealing with anxiety, we really need to also figure out how to like ourselves and this new self to be able to accept it. We have to navigate this new world, and we have to create an identity that gives us feedback in a very different way than what we have been used to. We also can create either a new support system, or we can re-engage with the support system that we had. But part of this, again, will give us the opportunity to figure out how to relate to individuals in this new space and how it makes us feel. We can set those boundaries. We can be mindful of what makes us feel good. We can also control or limit the information that comes to us, because the information that comes to us, whether it's in person, whether it's through social media, whether it's the news, all of that helps to basically inform our identity. And as we inform our identity, that then helps us create the new you. So I have a little bit of information here on a couple of studies. This particular study was done in the Journal of American Medicine. It was done in August of 2020 by the CDC. And what they looked at is 3 variables related to anxiety, depression, and trauma. And what you will see in this, and this was done not in the long-term care setting, but individuals who live in the community, is that as you get older, or as people were older in their sample, they were less anxious. So by 65, we only had 6.2% of the people in this study reporting anxiety, as opposed to 49% of the 18-year-olds. And depression, 5.8% as opposed to 52%. And in terms of trauma, 9% as opposed to 46%. There was another study done by the Kaiser Family Foundation in August of 2020, looking again at anxiety and depression. Older women were more likely, 28% to 20%, to report depression. Older Hispanics reported higher rates of depression and anxiety than did Hispanic whites and Blacks, as well as Asians. And more older adults also reported that if they were between the ages of 65 and 74, they actually reported higher rates of anxiety and depression than people 80 and over. This particular statistic was of interest to me. I'm not quite sure how to explain that, but maybe there were fewer people with less lofty goals. Maybe people were reaching out more. I really don't know how to explain that. Other findings in the Kaiser Family Foundation study is that 48% of people who were in poor or self-reported bad health, or poor or fair self-reported health, reported anxiety or depression, and that was compared to 14% who self-reported that they were in excellent or good health. Similarly, as we might expect, that households, 37% with the income under 35%, again, reported higher rates of anxiety and depression when compared to households of $100,000 or more. Another finding was that people who lived alone were a little bit more likely to experience anxiety and depression, 27 to 24%, but not necessarily significant. And lastly, there were higher rates of depression, 34% to 21%, if you lived in a household where someone was unemployed. So in conclusion, basically, the longer that the pandemic has continued, the higher the rates of anxiety and depression among older adults. And that just confirms then that this new vaccine normal, as well as the post-pandemic normal, are going probably to have to deal with those issues. The other thing that the Journal of American Medicine work looked at was another study on resiliency, especially on those individuals who were living in the community. And what they concluded is that individuals who were living in the community, who had close and meaningful connections, were less likely to experience isolation and were more resilient. Even though they might experience it, they were able to bounce back or to report that it was not for long periods of time. They had coping strategies and things that they could use to get beyond their isolation. The other thing that they reported in terms of things that helped in terms of the resilience, and remember this was done last summer, was that if they avoided travel, they didn't get out in the public, and they weren't around people who were coughing, that also contributed. This was an interesting variable that they looked at as well in the same JAMA study, and they looked at how does wisdom help with resiliency, and they defined wisdom in a very interesting way. They defined wisdom as empathy, the ability to relate to other people and to basically get inside their feelings and their emotions to feel what they were feeling. This is something that a lot of people do very well at, and a lot of people do not do very well at, because many of us are very self-centered and we really focus on us rather than on other people. They also found that older adults who were able to emotionally self-regulate, these are people who could keep to a routine. They could keep their emotions in check. They didn't have wide mood swings. So there was much more in the center, if you will. They were able to also basically feel okay. They defined that as wisdom. Another thing they defined as wisdom was the ability to self-reflect. So if you are an individual who can look at yourself, who can say, I did this well, I didn't do this very well, but I was someone who need to improve in these areas. I need to avoid that. I need to make myself a better person. That also contributed to wisdom. Another characteristic that they looked at was decisiveness, to accept uncertainty and diversity of perspectives. So if you are someone who can look at a situation, are able to cope with it, are able to make the best of a situation, and able then to accept other people's perspectives, even if you do not agree with them, that also contributed to their definition of wisdom. Other things is social advising. So again, were you able to really advise other people as well as yourself? What kind of engagement were you able to get involved with, and what role did spirituality play? For some people, spirituality meant actual church attendance. For others, it is more a mindfulness and a state of being. So the conclusion basically was that older adults have higher levels of wisdom than maybe other groups of people. Another thing that contributed to resiliency among people living in the community was compassion. And what they found was that it was inversely associated with loneliness. So if you were an individual who was able to be compassionate and to reach out, then you suffered less loneliness. as compared to people who were not able to be compassionate. So when we look at some additional work on this study in terms of promoting resilience, who experienced the problems of loneliness, it was probably people that we would very much predict. It was people who did not have access to smart technology. It was people who had few family and friends, and it was people who had some cognitive or biological problems, and that didn't allow them to engage in social connectedness, in physical exercise. They weren't able to participate in their usual routines. They also looked at how people participated in non-pharmacological interventions, meaning basically instead of taking antidepressants or other types of meds for anxiety and depression, they looked at these types of interventions, and again suggested that people continuing to be involved in therapy, physical activity, engaging in social connectedness, and spirituality as well as compassion were very important. So how do we really manage loneliness and isolation? So one of the things that is also suggested in the literature at this point in time is that we really look at how do we support seniors. So ask them about their appetite, ask them about mood, find out how their sleep patterns are, and if those seem to be not very well regulated, if they are out of the norm for that individual, those could be red flags and things that we might want to pay attention to. For some of us, we still need to engage in drive-bys or Zoom events. Some things we'll be able to engage in person, but others we really still will need to continue that. The other thing that we can do is we can engage in random acts of kindness. One of the things that our agency is planning to do in collaboration with one of our corporate partners in Older Americans Month is that we are going to be identifying approximately 1,000 of our clients, and the company that we are partnering with, they are recruiting 100 volunteers to write 10 postcards and mail basically a COVID-19 care package to those older adults. And so we will put small things in there to basically help people just to feel more engaged and feel like people really do care about them. Other things that we can do in terms of managing loneliness and isolation is to continue to look at various ways to use technology. Medical professionals continue to use telehealth. That has been approved by both Medicare and Medicaid to continue in terms of service delivery. We can continue to use virtual forums and use virtual visits when we're unable to visit in person. So we return to our past norms where we were able to get together, we were able to have fun, we were able to really engage with people. I think we will. I'm not exactly sure when that's going to happen, but I think we are on our way. The CDC announced on April the 2nd a new set of guidelines for fully vaccinated people. And this is what is driving me to begin to define the vaccinated norm. So for the first time in more than a year, if you are fully vaccinated and you are getting together with people who are also fully vaccinated, you can get together without masks and without physical distancing. If you are visiting unvaccinated individuals who are at low risks, You can also do that without wearing masks and physical distancing. You also, unless you are exposed to someone with COVID-19, you can refrain from quarantining yourself. Fully vaccinated people are also now allowed to resume domestic travel, and they can do that without having to test before or after the travel or to self-quarantine. So you may remember that we've spent many, many days when people had to do something or were exposed, and then they would have to come home and be quarantined. We also do not have to do any testing before we leave the United States for international travel. However, you may be subject to travel requirements for your destination. So some of you may have heard that Prince Harry, who has gone back to England for his grandfather's funeral, arrived on Saturday and was put into quarantine from the United States for, I think they said 10 days prior to him being able to engage in the funeral of his grandfather. Our new vaccine normal for fully vaccinated people will continue to include a well-fitted mask and public or physical distancing when in public. We also need to wear our mask and practice physical distancing and wash our hands frequently if we are with people who are unvaccinated, who are still at risk of COVID-19. And we also have to do the same if we are with people from multiple households or who are unvaccinated. For many of us, the other thing that we need to do, according to the CDC, is that we are to avoid medium and large size in-person gatherings. So we are starting to get invitations here at the office to participate in various kinds of senior activities. And at this point in time, we are not engaging in any of those, just because we do not know who or what we would be walking into. And it's one of the norms for the vaccine pandemic that the CDC is highly recommending. If you are exposed to COVID-19, you do need to get vaccinated. And if you are either employed or you go into businesses, you need to follow whatever that employer's guidance is associated with that. So just a few things to look at the vaccine norm. We're buying groceries, we're putting them in our cars with vaccines or with masks. We're still using a lot of hand sanitizer. We can now get together in small groups with or without masks, depending on the situation. We are able to go out, go hiking, enjoy the outdoors, but again, using masks is part of the vaccine norm. At this point in time, we also still need to practice various kinds of physical distancing. And in this situation, even though Christmas may or may not require us to be masked, I thought this was a great sentimental kind of picture. Our vaccine norm may or may want us to engage with our grandchildren with or without masks, again, depending on not only the age, but their potential exposure. Other things that we can look forward to doing is family photos now, coming together as small groups, exercising, getting together with people that we know is another thing we can continue. We probably, our vaccinated norm will continue to include lots of Zoom and computer interactions, as well as lots of sanitation and continuing. So people now are asking the question, are you sure I'm safe to leave home? And part of what gives us a lack of confidence in that is basically people who do not have the vaccine yet. Also, there's the group of naysayers, or the people who really are unwilling to get involved and to participate in the vaccine way to control the pandemic. Similarly, we have the new problem now. Initially was shortages, but now also the suspension of the J&J vaccine based on some of the side effects of people in Colorado, Georgia, and North Carolina. And so that is going to drag out, if you will, our vaccine norm longer. As some of you probably know, Governor Polis was hoping that everyone in Colorado would be vaccinated who wanted to be vaccinated by the end of May. I'm not sure what the new projections are. So in closing, basically, we need to stay the course. Older adults are very resilient. They are able to leave their home for small gatherings if they have been vaccinated. They're free to travel and should continue to wear a mask, distance, and wash hands regularly. So are there any questions at this point in time? Okay, with that then I will close and hope to see you next time. Thank you for attending.